Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast and our monthly Behind the Lens series. I'm your host, Byron Pace, and it is the 13th of August, 2020. Just one day after the opening of the grass season in the UK, I hope everyone who was out had a fantastic day. Today we have not one, but three guests on the show. Editor-in-Chief of Modern Huntsman, Tyler Sharp, joins me to speak with the guys at New World Cartography, Travis Folk and Tony Waters, as we hear the history behind the company, with origins anchored in science, and how they have kept the art of map making alive in a world of digitisation. Welcome to the show, everyone. Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast, everyone, and the Behind the Lens series. Really excited to do this show today because I've got Volume 5, Modern Huntsman, in front of me, and I'm pretty much opened the book to the center, page 158, 159, and I'm looking at the most stunning map that I've possibly ever seen. When I saw this, I immediately said to Tyler, I need one of Scotland. So I'm going to hand over to Tyler, who's also on this call here, Editor-in-Chief of Modern Huntsman, to do the intro before we get to the people behind this map. Tyler, how did this come to being?
Sure. Well, Byron, I think that, among many other pursuits in life, you and I are both map geeks.
Absolutely.
And I was in South Carolina at a place called Palmetto Bluff. Is that right, Travis? Is it South Carolina? It's kind of around the border of Georgia. And
it is, yeah.
Okay.
Savannah.
And it's kind of a private sporting club and a nature preserve and thing like that. And they had this event called Field and Fire, and they had a bunch of different vendors and artists and local craftsmen and craftswomen and all that kind of stuff. And Travis was there from New World Cartography. And I started looking over these maps, which are just beautifully and intricately hand-drawn and colored. And we just started talking, and I had my camera with me, and he kind of asked me what I do. And I said, oh, well, I run, a publication and a media company. And he's like, well, what's that called? I said, Modern Huntsman. He goes, no way. I've been a subscriber since the Kickstarter.
That's amazing.
So we hit it off immediately, and obviously, he was familiar with everything we're doing, and so we just started to dive into some of the maps that he had there. So one was all the waterfowl species of the United States, one was upland bird species, and then they had some for different oyster locations and things. And so, anyways, I just, of course, was enamored, and immediately was like, well, do you guys do custom commissions? And this was back in early February, I think. And so it was just in time, basically, for Volume 5 for us to be able to kind of start this conversation about what a custom map would look like for the Traditions issue. And then it just kind of went from there. And so, now in Volume 5, you're seeing the final result of our collaboration. And we've got some exciting stuff coming down the line with prints of this and the original and all of that. But yeah, really, really excited to release this pretty soon.
So, Travis, tell me the backstory behind New World Cartography. So how did that start? It's such a niche business, and I, like Tyler said, I freaking love maps. I've got maps from like 1910 and the late 1800s in my house. I've got maps on my walls, and I've got loads of maps folded up and in my bookcase. But cartography feels like a skill set that kind of died out with digitization. Yet we're looking at something here which is definitely art, but it's also functional.
It is, yeah. And I thanks for having us, Byron and Tyler. And I'll preface this conversation with I don't ascribe to other people personal beliefs except for one, and that is everybody loves maps. I've not met anybody that doesn't really love maps. So the origin of New World Cartography actually came of forestry and wildlife management. I professionally am a wildlife biologist. I went to the University of Georgia for my undergrad, and then Auburn University for my master's and for my PhD, where I worked on wood ducks and northern bobwhites, respectively. And in those 8 years in graduate school, I, of course, used GIS, Geographic Information Systems. And we were working on birds where we had radio transmitters on them and tracking them across the landscape. So we needed a spatially explicit analytical system to figure out what's the home range of a wood duck? What are the habitats that these quail are using? Those sorts of spatial notions. So I used GIS a great deal. I finished graduate school in 2006, and I came back to Green Pond, South Carolina, which is where I was born and raised. Green Pond is just between Charleston and Savannah on the lower South Carolina coast. It's an area called the ACE Basin, which that acronym stands for the Ashepoo, Combahee, and the Edisto rivers. These three rivers that all come into St. Helena Sound. And it's an area of tremendous conservation for the last 30 plus years. There are hundreds of thousands of acres, both that are owned by the federal government and state government, but also private landowners that are all managed for wildlife. I tell you all that because my father was and still is a forester and a wildlife biologist. And in the early 80s, he started our company, Folk Land Management. And we primarily work on private properties for private landowners that are trying to manage not just for game species like waterfowl, turkeys, quail, deer, but really many of these landowners have a conservation ethic, so they want to manage for a lot of different species. So if you think about the 1980s, 1990s, if you're trying to manage land, you don't have computers, you don't have GIS. And so my father had this old, crusty forester, Henry Sauls. He was former Marine. And I tell you that he was crusty and great guy, but somewhat curmudgeonly, because he hand drew all of the maps.
Wow.
And so when we would start working on property, he would draw the entire property. And whenever you do that, if you have a map of the entire property, you would take one copy of it and add some decorative elements, maybe some sketches of cypress trees or wood ducks or things like that, and give it to the owner. And they would put it either in the gun room or somewhere in the main house on the property. So when I come back from graduate school in 2006, Henry unfortunately passed away in the late 90s. But we had these drawers full of these hand-drawn maps of all these properties through South Carolina primarily, but some in Georgia and North Carolina. And so you can imagine the contrast if I'm working on a property, I'm preparing a timber sale, let's say, for example. I produce an 8.5 by 11 GIS map. We're going to harvest trees in this many acres. And then for just as a comparison, I go look at the 1985 hand-drawn map that Henry did, and there's no comparison. The computer cannot produce something that has the aesthetic appeal that a hand-drawn element can. And it's as simple as a line. You lay two lines on a sheet of paper, one derived from a GIS or a computer and one hand-drawn, you can pick up the difference. And then you imagine all of the other decorative elements on a map. That hand-drawn aspect really creates something that's both informative, spatially accurate, but also beautiful. So I was working in folk land management, and I still do that today. And this kept nagging me because I, like you, Byron, had a wall full of maps. I said, I wonder if anybody's doing traditional cartography. And I looked on the internet, Googled around, and I couldn't find anybody. And so I said, well, nobody's doing it. Maybe I should do it. And so about that time, I was lucky enough to meet Tony Waters, who's from Charleston. And we started off with New World Cartography. And I'll let Tony give you a little background on how he came to the project.
At the time I met Byron, I was working with an architectural firm, and one of the architects was a mutual friend of both of us. And when she had Byron Travis's information and what he was wanting to do, then she said, I have somebody. We just hit it off from the first. So, and I've always liked to draw. As long as I could hold a pencil, I like doing doodles and drawings. And then my aunt enrolled me with a lady teaching art. And what was good about her is she didn't try to teach us how to draw like herself, but to develop our own style. And so that was nice. And in the classroom, it was several kids I was about age 10 on up to high school age, so we could interchange ideas that way too. So that was interesting. And then when I went to college, which was Furman University, it's a smaller college in upstate South Carolina, and then I had my classical studies in art there too, and then just kept on going. And I liked drawing everything. I tried portraits of people, portraits of dogs, landscapes. I like watercolor, oil paints, pastels, not so much. They were so messy, but and just even black and white ink drawings. So I just did a little bit of everything. And I even had some things in a gallery in Charleston where I live, and they weren't selling very well. And the owner of that told me, well, you're too diverse. You don't have a style that kind of locks you in, and people are looking for, I want to see some more pictures that look the same as the other ones. And that just wasn't my style. So I just kind of took things out of the gallery and then just would do commissions for people I knew. And then I settled on the maps. And that's been one of the most enjoyable ones that I've done. So.
And we've been working together now for, I guess, going on 4 years.
That's amazing. I love the fact that it has this, at the sort of foundation level, it has a very solid scientific purpose, and yet you've managed to blend that with the aesthetics of art. Tyler, what was the remit that you gave the guys to go forth and produce this American sporting tradition map?
Sure. I mean, there really wasn't a whole lot of direction, right? When I saw the maps for the first time, I said, I want this, but how do we do it for Modern Huntsman? And I think that it was just perfect timing with the issue of traditions, right? And especially, we can't do a global traditions map. That would have been wall sized. So we decided to focus on North America, right? And some of the things like, quail hunting in the Southeast, and, elk hunting in the Mountain West, and, mule deer and whitetail and things like that. So we kind of originally pulled from some of the story topics in the book, but then we also wanted to kind of evoke that old outdoor life, 1940s, 1950s plaid jackets and, moose in the North Woods and, that kind of feeling. And so I really just kind of threw out some ideas of, hey, these are some topics. These are some animal species we're discussing. Let me know what you guys think. And they came back. I mean, they're such pros. They came back with this list. This is what we think. These should be, the vignettes. And when I say vignettes, when you look at the map, there's these little hunting scenes where, Tony illustrated and painted. There's a setter dog pointing with a guy probably shooting a quail. There's wild turkey. There's redfish. We've got fly fishing on the Yellowstone. Looks like a canoe in the North Woods of Maine, and American bison and things like that. So we really just wanted to kind of focus on what people would consider to be these strong representations of American hunting traditions. And and literally they came. We kind of just decided on what those would be. And then they just went after it. And when I saw it for the first time, it just, blew me away. It's exactly what we were hoping for. So,
Travis, when someone comes to you with a commission like Tyler had, what is your sort of collaborative process like between yourself and Tony to work out what this is going to look like?
Well, first and foremost, it's an iterative process. Refer back to first statement. Everybody loves maps, but then when somebody says, "Well, I want a map," our question to them is, "Okay, what do you want it to look like?" And I say, "Well, I'm not quite sure." So the iterativeness is, let's first talk about obviously size. What area do you want to cover, and then drilling down into some of the details. What do you want to express with this map? Not just obviously some of the spatial things. We wanted. The rivers, significant habitats across the United States. But then what are some of the other things we want to adorn this map with? So it's a back and forth conversation. It's really one of the aspects that both Tony and I really enjoy with our clients is talking to them about what do you love, what are your passions, and let's reflect that in the map. And so that was, of course, we worked with Tyler and Tito. And it was really, we had several phone calls, multiple emails, kind of ideas going back and forth so that we could build in our mind, Tony and I's mind, what they were expressing. And obviously what was going to be the focus and real theme of Volume 5, which was tradition. So it's an iterative process, and it's a fun process. In terms of some of the specific elements, I'll let a number of the maps. We've done one of waterfowl of the continental U.S. and the flyways, another one of upland game birds. I'm lucky in that being a wildlife biologist and having worked with birds, that kind of comes as second hat. I know what the tail of a ruddy duck needs to look like in comparison to a canvasback, or those sorts of small details, kind of zoological details are fun for me. Of course, I've got plenty of field guides, that Tony and I pore over and look at, details of feathers and horns and antlers.
Because talking with Travis about the animals and stuff, he's the hunter and I'm not, but he gives me all the details that I need and the pictures and everything to help me draw it. And when we first were working together, we would discuss colors for the water, colors for the land, and however it should look. And then as we developed the maps over and over, it was more of a give and take from each one of us. And it becomes a real collaborative effort, because I can say, well, why don't we try this color here? What if we try something just a little bit different? He's like, I'm all for it. I trust you. And so it's just a pleasure to work that way with somebody.
And I'll also add one thing, Byron, I've listened to a number of your podcasts and several of these behind the lens. I think you had one of the photographers for the previous episode for the Texas fly fishing. And in much the same way, the photographers really think about the details and the essence of the photograph. The same goes with color in the map. As folks, listeners, look at this map, hopefully in Volume 5 that they've just received in the mail. The blues are not by accident. The greens are not by accident. So there's a lot of detail and thought and that goes into making those hues, colors, and textures just right.
Yeah, I'm curious as to the technical process that you go through to produce this, because actually drawing a map, if we ignore the sort of the beautiful depictions of game around the map, but drawing an actual functional map as itself to scale, how on earth do you go about that?
It's somewhat similar to the process of old, and of course, up until some point in the early 20th century, the process that they would use is they'd use wood blocks, but more effectively and more commonly later on, copper plates, and they would etch the line work, the black line work in text. In much the same way a printing press would work, they would ink that, they would stamp out on a sheet of paper the black lines and letters, and then hand apply the color. What we do is we will print off an aerial photo of what we call a base layer. And I use my computer to design that, print it off on our large printer, so that then we can take a product called Mylar, and it's nothing more than just kind of heavy-duty tracing paper. We lay that on top of that base layer so that then we can hand draw everything. And it's for for example, state boundaries, rivers, and the spatial things. It's obviously just a tracing process, making sure everything is spatially accurate, not only the political boundaries, but the curves of the edge of the ocean, things like that. Once we do that, so we do all of the ink work on that. We then we'll have that ink work printed on cotton rag watercolor paper that has a clay lens right on top, and then we hand apply the coloration to that.
And then the animals themselves, it's just a ton of photographs that we go through and kind of pick and choose, and I just hand draw that on the Mylar as well. That's not traced. It's just easier to draw it, but have something to go by, like a model, drawing a model. So
And part of the fun of doing these maps is the research. In addition to being a cartophile, I'm also a bibliophile. So I think Amazon delivers books to me just about every day. And so, like this map, we're, looking at most of my hunting experiences in the eastern U.S. So, packing out elk in the Mountain West isn't something I've ever done. Love to in the future, but it gives us a chance to really dive deep into certain areas and both visually photographs, other paintings, but also narrative text. So we make sure we understand. If we're going to draw one of the vignettes, we understand exactly all of the elements that need to be there.
And also the fun we have too is also with the compass and the north arrows and trying to make each one a little unique for each map. And that's when we ask the clients certain things that interest them. And so we get an idea of what I can add to the compass to enhance it or make it a little bit more unique.
And I don't think, and I'm not sure Tyler even knows this, but on the map we did for Traditions for Volume 5, the compass here was modeled after the compass carried by Lewis and Clark during the expedition, which now I'm pretty sure either in the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian.
Oh, yeah, I can see.
That's amazing.
I can see right now underneath it. It says courtesy of Lewis and Clark underneath it. Wow, that's really cool. I had no idea.
I love that attention to detail, and it's what an incredible process.
Yeah, Byron, what I was going to say is, just to create a little bit of, anticipation, we're actually we have the original, right? So the hand inked and hand colored map that we're going to be releasing on the website here in the next few weeks, as well as some hand colored versions where, as Travis said, the ink outlines will be printed on watercolor paper and Tony's going to hand color an additional number of them, right? I think we might do 5 or something like that. Right. And then we're going to have, I forget what the final size was, Travis, 22 by 19 or something.
I think we're in the ballpark.
Yeah, of an archival prints of these maps, right? So pretty close to 24 by 20, but I think we're only going to do 100 of those. So, that's something we've been working on. We're really excited to release that, and so it's definitely something that it's going to come out pretty soon. So listeners got to pay attention if they want to grab one because there's just limited of them because it's so involved on Tony's part with these artworks. So
I can see this being an incredible set of memories for expeditions or trips that you don't want to forget. I can think of a couple in my mind that I've done in the past where I would love to have a map like this of the area that I'd been to with these little memories dotted around it. That would be so incredible. I mean, maybe that's something I need to get into the habit of doing for really important trips that I do around the world.
Yeah. I think, and Byron, I think you need to think about what an overarching map of Scotland looks like with both your personal favorite places, but also historically significant ones, so that you guys can collaborate on a map of Scotland.
I think that sounds like a mighty fine idea. Tony, Travis, last kind of question I wanted to put to you guys before we bring this to a close is what is the craziest commission you guys have ever had? What is the biggest map in existence that you've produced, if that is the thing that's been most complicated to put together?
Well, I'll answer that with describing either ends of the spectrum. We did, of course, craft brewing for beer is in the United States, and especially here in Charleston, is really booming right now. And there are a group of brewers in downtown Charleston that have created the brewing district, and they all came together to produce one beer, and they contacted us and wanted a map of downtown Charleston with all the different breweries on it. And that map was about 3 inches by 5 inches, so quite small. It's on the front of a beer can and beer bottle, and it's kind of cool to go to my local grocery store and grab my beer with my map on it. So that was the smallest one, and that one was fun. I got a couple of free 6-packs of beer out of it. But probably the largest one and the one that we drew at scale was one we finished last summer. It was for a group called the Port Royal Sound Foundation, which is a nonprofit that focuses on water quality and education in the Port Royal Sound area, which is right there around Hilton Head, just between Charleston and Savannah. And they have a museum, natural history museum, and they had a large wall. And when I first met with them, they said, we want a map that covers the coast of South Carolina, go. And what we, again, going through that iterative process with the executive director and one of their board members, we settled on a map that we drew 100% to scale, and it was 9 feet tall and 14 feet wide. And so that was technically one of the most challenging, one of the most rewarding maps, and obviously the largest map we've ever done. So that one was a lot of fun.
We had to do it in strips of 3 feet by 9 feet because that's all the room I had on my dining room table to draw it and color it. So that was quite a challenge, but it was so amazing to see it in person, all pieced together and hanging on that wall. And I kept forgetting that I had drawn it to scale and it wasn't blown up from a smaller drawing. But so that was a huge success.
Incredible. For me, there is something about maps that, particularly old maps, but I mean, all maps have this to some extent, that kind of stirs up this very deep, soulful emotion to explore. And I think all of us having this conversation on this podcast today share that. And I pity anybody that doesn't know what I'm talking about because it is such a big part of who I am, is to being able to look at maps and just wonder what is there, to have my feet on the ground where this map is sort of laying out these potential paths for exploration. But it's been fantastic to have you all on the show today. And what an insightful discussion, and I can't wait for people to see this for themselves. And you know what, you have to see it printed on paper. Just seeing a digital version of it absolutely does not do it justice. And I will put the links to both Modern Huntsman Volume 5, where you can buy that, and also to New World Cartography in the show notes, so that people can go over and check you guys out and have a look at the work. But thanks for taking the time to have a conversation with me today. I've really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, so did I. And
thank you, Byron. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much for listening. Join me again next week when we take another walk into the wilderness.